Hey guys, I am today's host, Sandy. So glad to have you watching here. We made it for abroad readers to know more about Chinese culture from the book Postcards from China Travels Along the Grand Canal, which is written by David. The book tells us the history, the aesthetics, and the spirits of cities and also the globalizers along the Grand Canal. The author, David, it is our great honor to have him to share with us about his impressions. And David is a great person who devoted most of his life on history researching and education. After he got his Doctors of Philosophy from the University of Chicago, he taught history all the time. He began teaching in China from 2013, and he records a lot during his traveling here in the book. So now let's welcome David.
I'm Professor David Pickus. I'd like to speak with you about my new book, Postcards from China, Travels Along the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is one of the most interesting and significant sites in China, but it's not as well known as things like the Great Wall or the modern city center of Shanghai or many other places. Still, if you want to understand China, it's really important to know something about the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal, for well over 1,000 years, was a key instrument of holding China together. In my book, I describe how I travel up and down the Grand Canal and think about what it meant for Chinese civilization then and what it means today for such a vast country to connect itself by different means of transportation, and more than that, connect itself by shared ideas. One of the arguments I make in the book is that what the Grand Canal was to traditional China, globalization is today. So the Grand Canal is another way to think about China's globalization and the ways that all civilizations hold themselves together. It describes my experience of what it's like for me to move to China. It describes the experience of people living on the Grand Canal then and now. It takes an interest in the traditional Chinese arts and culture that sprung up along the Grand Canal. And it talks to Chinese people who are now living and working as what I call the globalizers of modern China. If you're interested in this book, you can find it in Chinese translation on something called Tmall. And if you'd like to read it in English, you can find me on Amazon with my name David Pickus, Pickus, and the title, Postcards from China, Travels Along the Grand Canal. Thanks very much.
Okay, so hello, David. So here are some questions for you.
Very good.
Yeah, and the first question, when did you first become interested in Chinese culture?
Well, I knew about Chinese culture a little bit from when I was growing up, but the thing to remember is at that time, American people didn't know very much about China at all. And I never spoke to a Chinese person until I was well past 20 years old. Never spoke to one. But actually what got me interested in Chinese culture was the European culture of Greece. I was in Greece with my students, and I started to ask myself if they really only needed to see the old culture of Europe. So I went by myself to Asia, and I had never been before. And I saw how quickly things were globalizing and modernizing in Asia. And I said to myself, and from that time I've been interested in China.
Okay. Thank you so much. And why did you choose the Great Canal as the subject this time?
Well, like a lot of people, when I came to China, I wanted to see the Great Wall to see, but I didn't understand very much about what the Great Wall meant. And the more I learned about the Great Wall, the more I got interested actually in the Grand Canal. Because while the Great Wall is important, it's about war and it's about defense, like keeping outsiders from coming inside. The Grand Canal regions and the topic of how civilizations hold together is the one that interests me the most.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. And you have written a lot about the Great Canal in your book. And what do you think? Which uh, anecdote, anecdote impresses you the most?
Well, before I say it, it's important for foreign people to understand the Grand Canal isn't one thing. There are many different water systems that have been connected at different points in time. The story that sticks most in my mind about what this means is when I was in the Jiangsu. It's a province right in the middle of China. Because I come from the middle of the United States, where there are also big rivers. Yeah. Only this was different than, say, the Mississippi River in America, because the Grand Canal, even if it made use of an existing river or lake, was never very wide. What it was something that people mostly dug and dug again in order to keep boats going. And boats could only go at certain times of the year, and then they could only move in a kind of coordinated rhythm. You can still see some of this today. So here's my story anecdote. I was in the city of Yangzhou, in the sort of the center of Jiangsu, early morning, and I saw a traffic jam of boats, long, thin, flat boats. And if you moved your head a little bit, you could imagine that today's boats were like yesterday's boats. You could still see the coordinated effort to move in a line and to, connect one region to another.
The next question is that what is your impression of the Great Canal, especially the Hangzhou section? Yeah.
Hangzhou's Grand Canal is particularly interesting because it shows a trend that's going on in China. Chinese cities in the 20th century were made to be industrial centers, but now they're transforming themselves to be cultural centers and kind of balanced living green centers as well. And so Hangzhou has turned its Grand Canal banks into a model of how you can have a green section right where the old industrial section used to be. And there still are signs of the old industry there, but now they've been made more interesting and beautiful because there's urban renewal and transformation around it. The urban planners have done a very good job in Hangzhou.
Okay. Thank you, David. And next, I think through your impressions, and the readers can know more about the Great Canal and also what makes the Great Canal of culture unique compared with other canals in the world.
Well, there really isn't anything quite as big as the Grand Canal. In France, there's what they call in their language a Southern Canal, But what that really was something that connected two big oceans or bodies of water, the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Um, Only China has such a long one, and nothing's unique. But what makes China different is this. Um, China didn't have any river that connected the pattern of where people lived. The people lived in a pattern from north to south and south to north, but their
Yeah.
main rivers they came from the west and went into the east. And so what you can see in the Grand Canal is China's ongoing struggle to try to make geography cooperate with it.
Yeah.
And geography sometimes cooperates, sometimes they do not. So the unique story is the story of how the Grand Canal sometimes held people together, sometimes didn't, sometimes was able to link natural phenomenon, and sometimes could not. It's an interesting story.
Yeah, yeah. I think you know more about the Grand Canal than Chinese us. Yeah, and how does it help the world to understand Eastern civilizations, especially the Chinese civilization?
Uh, People are actually basically the same. Um, we look different and we sound different, but we're one creature. We're the same. We're the same human being. What helps people is this. Um, the Grand Canal is a very, very big example of something that people do in small ways all over the world, which is to try to take small pieces and link them together in such a way that you have a big system of exchange. The Grand Canal, it did have some military purpose, but its biggest purpose was to move food. China, people in the north couldn't grow enough rice. And they couldn't grow any rice, at the far north or something. So they had to move food. And once they brought food, then all kinds of things could go back and forth. And here's the direct answer to your question, then why we need to know about this part of China or Asia to understand everything. The Grand Canal that we talk about today lasted maybe say 1400 years, or depending on a little bit less, maybe from around 500 AD up through the middle of the 1850s. That's how it different pieces of it, but the system goes on. And so I argued in my book that what we see in globalization today is a version of what they tried to do in the Grand Canal of yesterday. It wasn't the same thing, but what the Grand Canal tried to do is make it possible to have different parts of the world linked together, different territories linked together and become one thing. Our globalization tries to do this at a high cost. We don't always succeed. Things unexpected happen, and we have to try again. And also, people have to keep working at it. The Grand Canal looked like it took no work, but if you just let it go for a couple months, the walls would start to crumble, etc. Same thing's true of our globalization. We could take it for granted when it's working, but if you neglect it and you let it go, all the things that connect us can start to break or to get older and older and fray. So we don't have to think of China as being so different than everybody else. What we have to understand is how significant the effort that people made.
Yeah, yes. Okay, we got that. Just like people cannot live without water, and maybe in the history in ancient times, we travel with the water to other countries, right? And we can also use the canal to deliver the food. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, David. And the last question: what do you think? Western readers are more interested in when introducing this book to the world?
I'm not is a Western person and tries to write about China has a set of problems that are already there. If you talk about something that's too complex, maybe people won't understand you. If you say something that people already know, they might get bored and find what you say too simple. If you claim that you know Chinese people, maybe they think we are arrogant and like you just jump to conclusions and too proud. If you say you don't know anything, well, actually, you might not have anything interesting to say, or you might be wrong. You might have something interesting to say. So I don't try to do that. What I try to do is instead share. And of course, some people will find it too simple, and some people will find it too different from their own experience. But that's how it should be. We shouldn't expect people's thoughts to always be like ours. We should just try to make our own thoughts more clear.
Yeah, okay. Just like there are 1,000 Hamlets in 1,000 people's eyes, right? So, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So everyone will have their own ideas, opinions when they come to China or they read the book. So, what are your comments and suggestions on introducing the Grand Canal to the world?
Well, I think people, when they come to China, should go to see it as much as they go to see the Great Wall. Hangzhou is a good place to do it, but you can do it in many other cities. Other cities have done a good job as well. Yangzhou, many more. When Wuxi, you can go, and some of the other cities, you can see various parts or things like this. But Luoyang, it's just one branch of it. The important thing is for like a Western person who wasn't familiar with the names I just mentioned, is not to worry. First of all, when you get to China, you can go to these places without too much difficulty. And the most important thing is don't think you won't get interested in it. It may look different at the beginning and strange, but once you start to understand it, you'll see what I said before. These are human problems shared by all of us, and the solutions people try to use to solve the problems are human ones that we all can understand. So it'll be interesting to see it.
Okay. I think I just saw something from the book that you have written many to describe some Chinese cities like Luoyang, like Yangzhou, like Hangzhou. They are very historical and have their own histories. And I think the readers can be more interested on Chinese culture through this book. And thank you for sharing with us about your impressions and the introductions of this book. Okay, so I think that's for today. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.